All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Trimble, and I am the Director of Communication and Outreach at the Indiana Disability Rights. I almost said the wrong state agency. So this morning, I am here with my colleague, Keith Butler, and we're going to talk education and access to education during COVID-19. So with that, Keith, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Keith Butler. I'm the senior attorney at Indiana Disability Rights. I'm in charge of the education team.
And Keith, so how long have you been at IDR now?
I think it'll be 10 years in October, if my math is right.
So yeah, I was gonna say I really like talking about how long our staff has been at IDR because I think that is really impressive that we have people that have been around so long. So we're really happy to have some expertise on board. So I think everybody has questions about education in general during COVID-19, but especially if your child is getting services through the school that are not available or different, there's probably a lot of questions about what their rights are during COVID-19. So I'm just going to go through, we have a great FAQ that you wrote on our COVID-19 website that we will put a link to in this video. But for now, I just thought I'd ask you some questions because I'm sure people have a lot of questions and it's just kind of an overwhelming time already. And then to be trying to figure out how to make sure your child has services during this has got to be challenging. So I'll just ask a few questions and have you explain to people what their rights are.
Sure.
So if my child has an individualized education plan or IEP during the school year, how does that work during COVID-19 with remote learning?
Yeah, so just a couple like big things is nothing within the overall law has really changed. There's no like reduced standards, so an IEP is still in effect. And I guess having said that, we certainly want to recognize that it's a situation that nobody expected or could really plan for, including schools and teachers and school administrators and everybody. And so there's a lot of people trying to adjust and doing a lot of good work. But yeah, the IEP is still in effect. So if you have a student with certain IEP goals, those goals haven't gone away now that we're doing remote learning. So there's one other point I was going to bring, and that is, sorry, I had something written down and I just totally forgot what I was going to say. Yeah. Yeah, the other kind of like big picture thing I was going to say is, right now it's May 8th when we're recording this, and stuff changes all of the time. So, I definitely don't want to get in look like I'm trying to predict what things are going to look like in the future, whether it's legal changes or just what, the world will look like. But as of now, as of May 8th, and I'm hoping this continues into the future, if you have an IEP, there is, I think every expectation that those are goals that should be being worked on and met as much as possible during this time.
So that's a great segue into something I wanted to ask is let's dispel a myth, right? There was a lot of information circulating, I think, on social media and traditional media that during COVID-19, the expectations for safe or free appropriate public education were going to change or be diminished. Can you help me dispel that myth?
Yeah, so the law is still in place. There was some discussion, and again, so far, nothing has happened with that. But that everything with IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is still in place. The federal Secretary of Education recently declined to make any what's called waivers, so lessening the standard. There's, I guess, theoretically, there could be a statutory change that hasn't happened. So yeah, the standards for FAPE or free appropriate publication are still in place.
Okay, so don't believe that, you know, things have changed to the point where your child will receive less, or worse, trying to phrase this properly, but things are still the same. There have not been an opportunity for a waiver to say like, oh, we don't have to meet these standards anymore. We don't have to abide by this.
Correct. And then I think we'll kind of talk about this later, but obviously there's probably some, you know, things under an IEP that just can't be done now. Like, you know, if you have a social group that met in a, you know, in your resource room with 6 other students where you're working on nonverbal social cues. I mean, maybe that can't be done right now, but the goals are still in place, and there are functions under, you know, outside of COVID-19 to help catch people up. And like I said, I think we might get into this a little bit later on, but there's avenues such as like compensatory time or what's called extended school year ESY services that might be used to as kind of like makeup once those services can happen again. But yeah, but the idea of FAPE or free appropriate public education is definitely still in effect.
Okay, so we've got some good questions here that I think are definitely an issue for a lot of students. Is what happens if the remote learning is happening online and I don't have access to internet or dependable internet, or I don't have a laptop or a computer that's just for my kid? Maybe I do have a laptop in the home, but parent needs to use it to work. So what can I do about those issues?
Yeah, and that's a good point, because you know, school districts and families and communities in general sort of came into this with a lot of different levels of technology, right? I mean, there's some school districts where every kid has a laptop or a tablet, and you know, they, on snow days, they would do e-learning and they're already set up, and there's other areas where, you know, that just isn't the case. So I mean, hopefully that is taken into account in your school's plan. You know, that isn't an expectation if those services haven't been provided. 2 things. One is there are a lot of, I guess, access to free services now, whether it's through your school district. You know, if you don't have a tablet, I mean, I guess that would be my first call. Is that something that they can provide? You know, as far as Wi-Fi, some internet companies, some, you know, telecommunication companies are offering free Wi-Fi. This might be calls to make. And then disability specifically, you know, within an IEP, one of the questions is, does your student need assistive technology? Now that might be something where, you know, when you're in the case conference meeting, it's literally like a checkoff box when they're filling out the IEP, and that might have just always been checked no, and maybe that was fine before, that your student didn't really need assistive technology, and maybe that's changed now. So again, I think we're kind of talk about this later, but you have the right to call it a case conference, and then one of the considerations of the case conference for the IEP is, do you need assistive technology? So if that's changed during this, that would definitely be a good, you know, a good issue to bring up.
Okay, no, that actually leads me to my next question. So that's great. So yeah, so say I was happy with my child's IEP before, but now in COVID, I feel like it's not working. So I can call a case conference.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it'll probably be done remotely. I mean, I'm actually pretty sure it'll be done remotely. But that is definitely an option. There's guidance from, you know, Indiana's Department of Education that case conference should be done remotely. I mean, and you should be able to effectively participate in that. So whether that is, you know, we set up a video call, or whether that is by phone, you know, whatever kind of people are comfortable with, but the parent should be able to participate effectively in those case conferences, and you do have the ability to call them just like you did prior to this.
So, all right, so I'm able to have case conferences. What about my annual case conference? How and when is that going to get pushed off? Like, when should I be, if we haven't had one yet, when should I be preparing for this annual case conference?
Yeah, so there is specific guidance from Indiana's Department of Education that there is no change in annual case conferences. In other words, the under Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and sometimes we call it Article 7 here in Indiana. There's a few reasons why a case conference would be called, and one of them is that it has to happen at least annually. And so that's typically called the annual case conference. And so that law hasn't changed. So, you know, your students should have a case conference within a year of the last annual case conference. So, and again, they'll probably be done remotely, but that is still in effect, and that there's pretty clear guidance from Indiana's Department of Education that those need to happen.
So during these different times, you know, what should I be documenting? What should I be reviewing for my student? What should I be doing during this time to kind of prepare for those case conferences, or prepare to have a discussion with the school officials about my child's education?
Yeah, so I think as a starting point, probably the best thing to do is make sure you have, I know it might sound silly to say, but you know, it's a stressful time and maybe we don't have it, is make sure you have a copy of the IEP, or if there's any accompanying documents like a behavior improvement plan or BIP, or you know, that you have those documents, you've read through them, you know what your students' goals are. I mean, it's, you know, we're all sort of like busy people, and sometimes, you know, you might not have every IEP goal memorized, but now that they're home and it's more important, you know what the goals are. So I'd say that's the first thing. And then again, look through it. Is this something that is happening or potentially could happen remote learning wise? Maybe it's not happening now, but you know, with a couple calls to your, you know, resource teacher, it's something that could be worked on. And then if it's something you feel like just can't be done right now, I would definitely document it. Like, this goal 2 isn't happening right now. So maybe that would be one thing, is just to document what under the IEP isn't being met right now. And the other is, if you notice that your student is regressing, like, you know, maybe it's a student with autism and social skills are really the big thing you're working on now, and it's a little hard to do in our current environment, then you know, document that and as specifically as possible. So I mean, I think that's kind of the starting point.
So we've talked about a few different kinds of supports. What about behavioral supports during this time? How can parents work with schools on those supports?
Yeah, and again, probably the first thing to do is to understand what the school is working on, so their behavior plan. And then, you know, some of this might not translate to a home environment. You know, if the student was having difficulties with interacting with other students, or some problem that was kind of particular to the classroom but not at home, but some of it might be happening at home. You know, your student tends to have like escape behaviors, and you know, you're working on an assignment, and at school they would get stressed out and run out of the room. Maybe they're doing that for you when you're working on them at home. And so one thing I would say is, a lot of the support personnel, so not just teachers, but other people at school, you know, your occupational therapists, physical therapists, all those sort of other jobs that happen at school, they're still working more than likely, you know, during this time. And so if you had somebody that is a resource, or maybe wrote the behavior plan, that person is probably available to consult with if you're having those problems. And I mean, I would definitely use them as a resource.
So something you talked about a little bit earlier that I'd like to learn a little bit more about or share is, what is compensatory time and extended school year, or ESY services? Can you talk a little bit about what those are and why somebody might utilize those?
Yeah, so compensatory time is it's kind of a legal definition. It's generally sort of outside of our current situation. It's typically if a school had a student in some sort of inappropriate setting, or was receiving inappropriate services, and then that was kind of like later recognized. It's a way to make up time that was lost because the student was in this inappropriate setting. I think there's, you know, pretty good argument that this can be used now, even though obviously in a lot of these situations it might not be the school's fault that has happened. But I mean, I think that the concept still, you know, applies, that there's certain services under an IEP maybe that just aren't happening now, that this is a recognized way to catch a student up. and an extended school year is, again, it's if you sort of are in a case conference and have the IEP up on the screen, it's a checkbox. Does the student need ESY? And maybe it's one of those things in the past that has just always been checked no, and there hasn't been a lot of discussion about it. There's services that happen outside of the normal school day. It's typically during the summer. I think it's generally thought of as services that happen during the summer. Doesn't necessarily have to be. And again, that could be a good mechanism, again, with recognizing that we don't know exactly what summer is going to look like even now, but if to some extent those services can happen during the summer, ESY could be a good avenue to kind of like make up for time or regression that's happened because of the current situation.
So to reiterate, maybe my student hasn't used those services in the past, but that doesn't preclude them from potentially needing them in the future, or that being an option.
Right, and again, the an IEP is individualized, right? And your individual situation may have changed now. So where that might not have been necessary before, it very well may be now.
So how are special education evaluations being handled right now?
So again, hasn't been any waiver to the deadline. So any deadline that was in effect before is still there now. I mean, I would say that an evaluation, obviously the most important part of an evaluation is to end the evaluation with good data. So you might have to use some judgment as to whether it makes sense to continue with an evaluation or maybe work on extending the deadlines. So a few things with that. One is deadlines are normally counted on instructional days, and that might look different now. Like typically, like say an evaluation, there's a 50 instructional day time frame. So if there's been fewer remote learning days than there would have been when we're doing in-person instruction, maybe that deadline is kind of on its own been extended. And I would count, an e-learning day or a remote learning day as an instructional day. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. So so the deadline might be a little further that way. And the other thing I was kind of getting to before is, if let's say the critical part of this evaluation was an in-class evaluation, just to see how the student, reacted in a classroom around other students, and that was really important, then maybe it makes sense to extend the deadline until that can happen. A lot of evaluations involve some kind of, like, whether it's an IQ test or maybe an autism rating scale. They're typically done in like an office setting. Obviously I don't have the expertise to say whether those can occur remotely or not. But I mean, that's at least worth asking the question, like what is left to do on the evaluation. If it's just like, say, a parent or teacher questionnaire, that can probably happen, right? If it's something else, then you kind of have to understand why that test is needed, and can it be done or not. And those aren't sort of easy questions, just kind of like answer as people aren't experts, but it's probably worth at least asking the question.
Sure. I think going back to your comment about instructional days is every school district has a different amount of instructional days during the week now. I know for our school district, we have technically we have 3 instructional days a week, even though we at home are spreading that over 5 days because it's just better for our work schedule to do it that way. So I think that's the important thing, is go to your school district and figure out, okay, what are they counting as instructional days? Because somebody in another county or another school district, it might not be the same. So you really want to figure out for your child, what are those instructional days? Because I don't think it's consistent from school district to school district based on need and resources and things like that. So that's a really good point, to not think of it as business days or regular days, but instructional days, and really figure that out. So can I still request a Department of Education complaint, mediation, or due process hearing?
Yeah, so those deadlines have not changed. Now, within those, particularly, and hopefully if you're in, say, due process, you have maybe consult an attorney. I wouldn't recommend doing those without that, but within mediation and due process, sides can request extensions. And a lot of times the judge or mediator has some discretion whether to grant those extensions. And again, whether you kind of agree with doing the extension or not might be an individualized situation. You might object to it, and again, if there is mediation right now and you don't want to ask for an extension, obviously you'd have to be comfortable with probably doing that, through a video call or over the phone, which, isn't ideal, but then also that way you don't have to wait. So it's just kind of an individual decision, but there's no official, like waiver of those deadlines if they still exist.
So if I have some questions about my child's education and what I should be doing, who should I be contacting first?
I would always recommend starting at kind of like the lowest level. So if you have a question about what kind of services your teacher is providing, start with the teacher and kind of work your way up from that. If working within the school system, you don't get an answer you're looking for, you just need kind of like more general information. Indiana's Department of Education, they have, COVID specific email address, and you can ask questions there. Certainly if you feel like your rights have been violated, one of the things that we do is take those types of cases. So, that's always an option. I would, definitely try and start sort of informally and kind of work your way up from there.
Right, and we'll make sure that we share the COVID, the IDOE or Indiana Department of Education email address. I've got it here, so I'll say it, and then I will definitely put it in the comments too. So the email address is IDOE-19@DOE.in.gov. So that's for general questions. And then the special education questions can be sent to, it's special education, so SPECIALECAION@DOE.in.gov. So I think we just want to remind people, like you said, we're still working here. So if people maybe just have some questions about their rights or just need a little bit of support, just kind of, I think, clarifying things in these really weird times. I know for me, things I knew and felt really confident in February, my mind and my memory is really being challenged during COVID-19. So people can still call our team, right? They can still call intake and contact people just to kind of talk things through and figure out what their rights are and maybe what they look like now, right?
Yes, yeah, you can call cases. We're all still, like we talked about, case conferences are still going on. I think luckily my job is one that can be done remotely, and our advocates, I mean, it's not ideal obviously to not go to a case conference in person, but they can certainly attend remotely. So we're it's mostly business as usual, just from a different setting for our team. So
right, so we're just having, like everybody else, just having to get creative of how we do our work, but we're still able to do the work. And I really want to encourage people that if you have a question, you're not sure, please call our intake advocates at 1-800-622-4845. You can also email them and or fill out our help form on our website, which I will put in the comments. But just please contact us. Even if you think you know the answer and you just need somebody to confirm it for you, don't hesitate to call our team. That's what we're here for. So Keith, with that, my last question for sure is, hopefully at some point in time, we're going back to school, right? So this is obviously getting everyone out of our regular routine. I mean, it's just really different for everybody. So when we go back, whenever that is, what should I do if I'm just concerned to that readjustment back? This is a long time out of school, and it's going to take some time to get back into the groove of things. So what should I do if I'm concerned about that readjustment when we return?
Yeah, so well, first, what we know so far, and again, it's hesitant to make this sound like a prediction, but the current, I think it's useful just to understand the current executive order runs through the statutory school year. So in other words, most times we think of the school year as ending on the last day of school, but under a state legislature, the school year ends June 30th. So the executive order runs through June 30th. So after that, there is no executive order. Now, whether there will be something in the future, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be at least some sort of guidance. There's currently a, I think it's like a re-entry task force that the Department of Education has put together. As of we're recording this, that what their kind of like guidance hasn't been released. But I mean, obviously you can see a few different situations. So I thought maybe I could just kind of talk through some of them. One would be, you know, you're worried about your student, you know, going back for health reasons. So, you know, like you can imagine somebody who had, let's say, had chemotherapy or a organ transplant or somebody with a weakened immune system might not want to sort of go back to in-person instruction at all. That's fortunately something that's obviously been happened before. I mean, there's other people that have had immunocompromised systems before coronavirus happened and couldn't go back to school. So, you know, now would probably be a good time to start talking to your healthcare provider, your doctor, and kind of getting opinions as to, you know, when or if it's safe to go back, and start communicating with your school. And within all these situations, again, you have the right to call a case conference, you know, whether it makes sense to do it now or closer to when school comes back might be kind of an individual determination. So that's one scenario. You know, I think we already kind of talked about, you know, if you're just worried about regression in general, you know, that the student is kind of falling behind. You know, again, that's something we kind of talked about with documenting what they're behind on and having a case conference just to kind of discuss how to catch them up. And then obviously you can imagine a whole other set of scenarios. Like we don't know, for example, whether students are going to be required to wear masks. So like, you know, let's say you had a first grade student, you know, who with autism, the idea of wearing a mask all day, you just can't imagine that they can put it on for 5 minutes, let alone an entire day. And you're worried they're going to take it off and they're going to get in trouble or this or that. And again, those are probably conversations. It'd be good to call a case conference and just, you know, discuss what you see these issues being, and how to handle them. So again, not making any predictions about whether when we're going back or whether students are going to have to wear masks or not wear masks, but I mean, I know those discussions are happening. So as you kind of get that information, you know, try and keep up with what your individual school district's reopening plan will be whenever that's released, and think through maybe if that affects your student uniquely because of their disability.
I think that's something that we can definitely revisit this when it's later in the summer, when we know more, to kind of give people those reminders of like what you can talk about, what you want to think about, and how to voice those concerns. Because I know that I will be in a very different frame of mind at that point in time and probably need some reminders of what I need to think about. So I think we can, once we know more, we can definitely talk about how to reentry or how to get back to school. We can definitely do another interview at that time, because it's a lot of information to process right now, that's for sure. So Keith, with that, is there anything else that you want to share to close us out?
You know, I think we've pretty much covered it. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. Again, we have a frequently asked questions guidance document on our COVID-19 webpage, and I will make sure that's a direct link so people can find that. But if you have a question and you're watching this and you have a question, excuse me, that's not on here, call us. If you have a question that is on here and it's still not quite making sense to you, please call us. Because believe me, at this point in time, I think we've all read things that before probably made sense, but now with all the extra stress and things we're thinking about, sometimes going through this is just more overwhelming. So please call us, contact us, and let us help you understand what's going on or how that works for your student. So with that, I want to say thank you to Keith for being on this morning, and thank you to our interpreters, Diane and Amy. We're so thankful to have you both here. And with that, we'll say see you later and hopefully have more information as we know more.